Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson. I'm so thrilled to be here today with Marc Brown as we celebrate the launch of his book, Outward Bound Lessons to Live a Life of Leadership. And welcome to all who are joining us. Welcome to Eduardo, who's going to join us today as a very special guest on today's webinar. As you're coming online, I would invite you to find the chat panel. And in today's event, we will be interacting with you through that chat panel. As you find the chat, please use the selection that says all panelists and attendees so that when you're typing your comments, we can share them with everyone. So if you can take a quick moment to let us know where you're calling in from today. I happen to be in my office in Lambertville, Michigan, and Marc is calling in today from Asheville, North Carolina. Hi, Marc.
Hi.
It's great to see you. So
Thanks,
welcome in Berkeley, California, and Chicago, Illinois, and Tiffin, Ohio. Now, if you happen to be calling in today and you're with a group in your organization who have gathered together to learn from Marc, would you tell us about that so we can give you a shout out? Wow, we have folks in Alaska, we have folks in Oklahoma, Virginia. Let's see if we have any international friends that we can shout out today. So welcome as you're joining us. A few things you want to be aware of for today's event. We are recording, as you may be able to tell. We are also broadcasting live to Facebook. So in the event that you'd like to find the Weaving Influence Facebook page and go ahead and share this live video event with your friends who might be able to benefit from learning with us today, you can go ahead and do that. So welcome in British Columbia and in South Carolina and sunny Denver and in Calgary. And a quick reminder, if you make the selection all panelists and attendees, then everyone on the call will be able to see your comments and questions throughout today's event. Eduardo, do you have some audio? Do you want to say hello?
Can you hear me there? Hello?
We can. And do you have a camera
wonderful.
Available by chance today?
Yes, let me see. There it is. Can you see me?
Yes. So Marc, do you want to take a quick moment and introduce Eduardo and let everyone know why he's with us today?
Absolutely. Welcome, Eduardo. For the book that I wrote, Outward Bound Lessons to Live a Life of Leadership, it really tells the story of Outward Bound through the experiences of several leaders who had outward lives and then went on to do some amazing things in the world. And Eduardo was one of the people that I met and interviewed, and he helped to found one of the Outward Bound schools in South America, and he's also done some amazing work with Outward Bound in connection to education and social entrepreneurship in South Florida. So great to have you joining us, Eduardo.
Super happy to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction, Marc.
So before we get started, we are going to do a few polls to get to know those of you who have joined us. We want to engage with you throughout today's event. But before we do that, I will introduce Marc Brown. As I mentioned, he's the author of a brand new book. It's available today for the very first time, launching today from Kohler Publishers, Outward Bound Lessons to Live a Life of Leadership, and we'll talk more about that later. Hey, we all have our copies. So Marc has 22 years experience as a field instructor with Outward Bound. His most recent gig was working with a leadership team at a New England company, and he has recently relocated to Hawaii, although he's not there today, where he is building a new coaching company focused on guiding organizations through change and creating positive culture. So Marc, again, welcome. It's so awesome to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
As we get going today, we do want to ask a few poll questions to get to know your past exposure to Outward Bound. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll and invite all of you to participate, and we'll share those results with you. So our first poll says, have you had an Outward Bound experience? And we're curious if you have had an Outward Bound experience, if it's a personal one or a professional one, or if you may have attended an Outward Bound school. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to respond, and thanks for engaging with us. Just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that one up. Thanks to those of you who are voting. And let's take a look at those results today. An overwhelming number of you have not had any Outward Bound experience, 83% of you. We do have 10% who have had a personal experience with Outward Bound and 3% with a professional experience. And a similar number for those of you who have attended an Outward Bound school. So thank you for sharing that. What we want to do now is take a look at our second poll. And this is about your previous exposure to Outward Bound. So what is your previous exposure? So do you know the name vaguely? Have you never heard of Outward Bound? Have you had an Outward Bound experience? Or do you know someone who has? So let's take a look, and I'm going to give everybody a little bit longer on this one. It's a pretty interesting question, and these percentages are going up and down as people are responding. So do you have any predictions, Marc, about how many people on this call have never heard of Outward Bound?
I'm going to guess more people have heard of it, but maybe know it vaguely.
All right, let's take a look. I'm going to share those results. So it looks like about 43% of you know the name Outward Bound vaguely. A quarter of you have never heard of Outward Bound before this event. And some of you have known people who have a previous connection. Again, only about 13% of you have had a direct experience with Outward Bound. So obviously there's a lot that we can learn together today, Marc, about the value of Outward Bound lessons on those of us who want to lead well. And let's start with this question. So the book is primarily focused on the idea of the expeditionary leader. Can you explain what you mean when you say expedition? That word, it's going to happen all day. Expeditionary leader. Tell us what you mean when you talk about an expeditionary leader.
So the book Outward Bound Lessons is based upon really the experience of an Outward Bound trip. Outward Bound was originally created as a wilderness-based experience. So the learning that happens is by going on expedition. So expeditionary leadership is a way of describing how a leader leads through the experience of leading people into the unknown, through the adversity that happens in the wilderness, and really how to create an organization, a team that supports one another, that trusts one another, and is able to really accomplish great things. So for those, since a lot of people only know Outward Bound vaguely or not at all, it would be good to let people know that Outward Bound is the oldest based wilderness education program in the world. It's in 33 countries, and annually about 250,000 people participate in Outward Bound experiences. And they are really based to help develop character in people and confidence. They're not wilderness training or survival programs. And in this country, there are tens of thousands of people who've had Outward Bound experiences and gone on to use those lessons to lead organizations, schools, start and run businesses. So it's one of the probably most widely impacted organizations that not a lot of people know about.
So Marc, can you give a little bit of clarity about this difference between the personal Outward Bound experience and the professional Outward Bound experience?
Sure. So there is a public enrollment courses. They're called Outward Bound as a School. So people can go and sign up for a program that could last anywhere from 6 or 7 days to as long as a semester. They're designed for young people. There are programs that deal with youth at risk. There's a huge veterans program, so veterans who have come back from war to help them transition back to the United States. Semester-long programs for college students. So those are the public enrollment courses. And then I spent over a decade working with Outward Bound Professional. So Outward Bound Professional works with companies or nonprofits, organizations to design leadership and team building experiences. And those can be anything from in a park or a retreat center to going actually out on a wilderness expedition. Many of the companies I worked with would send their leaders out for a 3 to 5 day wilderness expedition. Then we would follow it up with and learning inside the organization afterward.
That's helpful. And Marc, I'm going to invite you at any point if you have questions that you want to ask Eduardo to get his input on. And then to those of you who are attending the webinar today, please feel free if you have any questions throughout today's event to put them in the chat, and I'll speak them at the appropriate times, or toward the end of the call we'll take some questions as well. I forgot to mention that before. So thinking about this idea, Marc, of expeditionary leadership, when is expeditionary leadership the most helpful or useful?
I think expeditionary leadership it's a framework to look at when you're leading into an unknown situation. So right now is a great time for any leader to understand this, because when you go through rapid change, when the rules of business or an organization shift rapidly, when the things you thought were going to happen aren't happening anymore, it takes a a skill set as a leader to know how to navigate and lead through that change. And expeditionary leadership is an excellent tool to use if you're an entrepreneur and you're launching a company, because it gives you a chance to really build a company that's human-centered first, because a big part of an expeditionary leader's role is the growth and development and safety of the people that they're leading. And lastly, I would just say that I think that we're at a seed change moment in history where machine learning, artificial intelligence are rapidly changing the rules of society, and so it leaves a lot of people with a lot of discomfort, just not knowing what's happening, unsureness about where we're going in the world. And expeditionary leadership is actually it's born out of adversity. Adversity is a teacher. So Kurt Hahn, who is the founder of Outward Bound, one of the things he would say is that your disability is your opportunity. And so expeditionary leadership is designed to help people lead when the rules are changed and the future is uncertain. And this is it's a ripe time for it. A lot of the headlines that you see out in the world with the changing nature of business make this skill set really applicable. And I would actually ask Becky, I think this is a good time to bring Eduardo into the conversation, because he's done this work both with corporate leaders and also within schools. So Eduardo, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of your experience with Mindshift Impact on how you've used the expeditionary leadership model.
Sure. I 100% agree with what you said. And I think that uncertainty, as you said, is something that we're living through, especially, in today. And I see Outward Bound as a great tool to connect with your true potential and be able to, during uncertainty, what you have to do is probe. Usually we're so stuck to linear thinking, and Outward Bound allows you to break away from linear thinking to a more circular thinking, or a circular way of thinking, cost effect. And that for a leader in these times of uncertainty is very valuable, because it allows you to probe, which is something that we don't do often. Usually we jump into conclusions, we analyze, we bring the expert, and we take a decision. But I think in these times, probing is a far better tool, and Outward Bound is excellent to do that. Probing allows you to let the answer unfold, to let the answer emerge from the environment and what's happening. And that is the best call to action during uncertainty. And an expeditionary leader has that characteristic, and it's very good, for decision making.
So can you tell me, Eduardo, exactly what that might look like?
We're so committed to experts and what experts have to say, and we don't give much way to the cost effect of things. We tend to go from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, without looking back when we make decisions. And let's say that A is water, and B is the place you're at right now, and C is fire. And if you keep going on a straight line, you'll be straight walking into the fire. As opposed, if you're in B and you look back at A and you see, what have I done to A? How can I use A? And then you can move on to C, which is fire, and use that A to help you in that move. That is circular thinking. That is what's probing. That is what is an expeditionary leader has the ability to do. You don't have the answer, but you are probing. You are gathering information as you move, selecting the best way to, or the best choice to move forward.
Becky, I could add a story from the book that I think might help to illustrate this too, which is one of the Other people that I interviewed is Laura Kohler, whose family is the Kohler Company. Most people have heard of that name from their toilet or their sink or bathtub. And they're an international company, more than 30,000 employees. And so they aligned some of their principles around trying to tackle some of the largest social problems in the world. And then they turned that over to their teams. And what they ended up doing was a team of people decided to tackle the challenge of clean drinking water, which is a huge challenge in the world for a lot of people. And they collaborated around the world, and they had product designers and packaging designers. They even had cultural teams to look at things like making sure the color wasn't offensive to any culture. And they ended up designing this entire new water delivery system. The package designers figured out a different way to package it so that it costs less money to mail. And the only directive from the top of the company was we want to work to try to help solve water issues in the country. That was it. And no one knew what was come out of that. But then when Hurricane Irma hit 2 years ago, Kohler, through a nonprofit, was able to distribute more than 150,000 drinking water containers throughout the Caribbean to help get schools back, kids back in school, to get governmental operations up more quickly because they were able to provide clean water. So it's a good example of what Eduardo was thinking about, is it really was a team collective led by a leader who said, we want to work on this, but they didn't have the answer at all. They had no idea how they're going to do it. And it really, the alignment of that deep purpose with a chance to allow the team to lead led to a solution that was really innovative.
That's really powerful. Well, can we talk for a moment about what you mentioned regarding times of rapid change, uncertainty, and adversity? What advice do you have, based on these concepts of expeditionary leadership that leaders can tap into at these very challenging times?
There's certainly, there's two concepts out there in the world that I hear a lot. I think Outward Bound and expeditionary leaders have been doing a long time. So one is emotional intelligence. And I think that it starts with understanding that people are your greatest asset, regardless of what type of business that you're in. And so it's recognizing that whatever solution you are to whatever challenge you have, it's going to come from the team of people you're leading. And so your job as an expeditionary leader is to pull out the potential of that team of people, create a strong and safe environment, and then work with that team to help them solve whatever problems you're facing. And I think the other piece of that is knowing that adversity is the best teacher that there is. So when you're an Outward Bound instructor, you take people out of the place of comfort into a place of discomfort. You do it intentionally. Most people have no experience with being in a deep wilderness area, whether it's in a desert or canoeing or sailing or backpacking. They may have gone to a campsite, in their camper or slept in a tent, but they've never gone into the backcountry. And most of the time they're also with strangers. So it creates a lot of discomfort, discontinuity, and eventually adversity, whether it's physical adversity, whether it's within the group dynamics. And when you're in that moment at Outward Bound, that's the teachable moment. It's the same thing that's true in an organizational setting. In my last job, that was what we trained our managers to look for, those moments when our staff was struggling, to allow them to make mistakes and then talk about the mistakes versus prevent the mistakes, because that was the chance to learn and grow. And if you don't have a supportive environment, you can't do that. But really, in this constant change, it's the adversity. There's no shortage of adversity. There's no shortage of challenge for any leader, whether you're Miami, Florida, dealing with sea level rise, where your downtown streets are flooding at high tide now, which is not a problem anyone expected, to teachers in schools who are dealing with their kids, being on cell phones all the time and being so focused on screens that they're not focused on learning. All of those things create discomfort in how systems normally operated. And an expeditionary leader is actually using that as an opportunity to teach, not as a problem to get rid of.
That's helpful.
If I may add on
Eduardo.
to that, it's great. we talk about being out of your comfort zone. The expeditionary leader thrives in that out of the comfort zone. You expand your comfort zone by being outside of the comfort zone. So you search, to be out of the comfort zone in order to expand your skills. So very on point with what Marc said.
Sure, and I'm curious for those of you who are listening with us today, with a simple yes or no, tell us, does this resonate with you? Have you learned the most as a leader when you've been in adverse situations? And if any of you on the call have any stories or insights to share on this topic, we would love to see that. Go ahead and use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. And I imagine those of you who are sitting on the other side of these cameras, nodding your head, yes, I've learned the most in adversity. I know for me as a leader, I remember most the times of adversity. Those are the things that tend to stick with us. And Marc, I'm sure you have, hundreds of stories from your 22 years in Outward Bound where you could point to specific difficult times that you faced and remember those maybe more than other ones.
And, I think that those are, and again, in Outward Bound language, we talk about them as being teachable moments. And so as an expeditionary leader, you're waiting for the moment. You're not avoiding it, but you have to be present. So as a leader, you have to be present to watching and waiting for those experiences and then teaching and coaching through them. So it requires you to be focused on your people, not just on the goal, and I think for someone who spent 8 years helping lead a business, it's challenging sometimes when you certainly have to make your revenue goals and those things show up in your day-to-day life, and yet you can't sacrifice that, in the moment teaching. It's really, that's when the magic happens in expeditionary leadership, is when that adversity happens and you don't know where it's going to come from. When you go out on an Outward Bound trip, you take your group and you sail off into the unknown, and then you wait to see what happens. And it might be weather. It might be, I've had black bears show up in camp trying to steal our food, and also suddenly you have a wild animal in camp, and that's the adversity. Or you have a whitewater rapid in a river that you have to get around. Someone gets injured. There's all kinds of things that can lead to adversity, and the same is true in the workplace. I think you don't know where it's going to come from, but you have to be prepared as a leader to grab that moment when it comes and teach and coach to it.
So we have a comment from someone who said that they think it's so important, Marc, what you said about when people face adversity in the workplace, you need to ensure that there's adequate support to guide them through the process. That's a really powerful reminder. So let's talk a little bit more about expeditionary leadership skills that are most valuable for leaders and individuals to develop. So for the people on the call, you mentioned, emotional intelligence, Marc, and you mentioned responding to adversity in a powerful way. What other expeditionary leadership skills are most valuable for people to seek to develop?
The things that when I talk to the expeditionary leaders that I interviewed for the book, I think some of the things that became clear. So one was first was a really clear sense of personal mission for that leader, to really know that they knew that their showing up every day mattered to the people and the organizations that they lead. So it starts with, I think, having that clear sense of purpose. There's an importance of knowing that any organization is greater than the sum of its parts. So I think there's a understanding, enough of an organizational understanding. You have to learn that people together can really create a strong unit. And so certainly collaboration skills, team building skills are important. And I would say it can be hard to quantify these things, but when I left the field in Outward Bound and I started doing organizational work, being an organizational coach and trainer didn't feel all that different to me than being an Outward Bound instructor. So it's deep listening skills, it's empathy and connectivity, knowing that when someone comes in the door who reports to you, that you need to give them your attention. You can never neglect the human in the equation. And lastly, I think too, you have to have a balance of knowing how far you can push people with still holding them in a place of safety. So you certainly need to be able to inspire and challenge people as a expeditionary leader, but it's in connection with also that support, so that they don't ever feel like they're out over their skis. But I ended up in an industry that I didn't have a background in, and really the skill that I used was the same skill I used at Outward Bound, which is focusing on people development and training, coaching, listening. I think those are the skills that really apply the most in expeditionary leadership.
Eduardo, do you have something to add?
I can add to, or put it in a different perspective. I think it's very important to understand that everything you need to succeed is within you. You just have to search and reconnect. There's more in you than what you think. Second, you have to find your voice. It's important. It's not your father's, your mother, your boss, your coach's voice. No, it's your own voice. Find it. It's there. Third, just understand that it's not about you. This is about your team, your community, your neighborhood, and to work in those terms is usually better. And fourth, I would say, where's your passion? Make sure that your passion is in it, and connect your passion to whatever is it that you're doing. Finally, dream and do. It's important to just dream high and roll up your sleeves and put your passion into action. That would be my take.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So we want to talk now. The subtitle of the book is To Serve, to Strive, and Not to Yield, which comes from Outward Bound. And I'm wondering, Marc, if you can spend some time helping translate those phrases into the business world. And potentially, I bet you have some stories that would illustrate this. But, how do we translate to serve, to strive, and not to yield to organizational settings?
It's great. And of the business leaders that I spoke to write the book, as well as businesses that I worked as a consultant before I went inside leadership team of an organization, and the people who had Connection Outward Bound referred to the motto a lot. So one of those people is Frank Dowd, whose family owns and operates Charlotte Pipe and Foundry in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a 110-year-old company, one of the largest producers of PVC pipe and plumbing pipe in the world. And Frank Dowd talked about how that he of course in college, and he talked about the story he gave was he said, I went and got an MBA. It helped me learn how to run a business. I got a law degree. It helped me how to think. But this motto has helped guide me as a leader. And it's in recognizing that as a leader, every day you're in service of the people that you lead. And it requires humility to understand that you have a responsibility to their happiness, their lives, their fulfillment. If they are paying mortgages, all that stuff, as a leader, you have that responsibility. So you're in service of them, and you're also in service of the community where your organization lives. There's a larger responsibility that you hold than just to make money for your organization. You have a responsibility to be a good steward to your neighbors, whether they're other businesses or the government that's around you, and you have you also have a responsibility to serve the greater good of the world, and that's through whether it's environmental sensitivity or whether it's creating better workforce for people, so that you have healthier people out in the world. So that service piece of it is critically important. I talked with Arthur Blank, who's the co-founder of the Home Depot and owns the Atlanta Falcons, and one of the things he talked about, he asked that of me, which was like, do you go to work or do you go to mission? He said, service to people is the number one piece that he's most proud of in his life. He's in his late 70s now, and he just said that he was most proud of that, creating that environment of serving the people that worked for him. To strive is really that's where you learn to strive through stepping into the unknown. So when you lead, you have to learn how to trust the people you're leading and walk a pathway that is going to have twists and turns, is going to have adversity. So there's that striving through uncertainty. There's leading as a learner, knowing that the team may come up with the answers, not you, and you have to make room for that. Again, humility comes in deeply to that. If your ego is showing up a lot, you're going to struggle with this style of leadership. And then the last piece of that, not yielding, is really both looking at the challenges and doubts that can come out as a leader when you face hardship, but it's also about standing in a place of values and truths. So one of the things that Outward Bound taught was ultimately that compassion is the most important skill you can bring forth in the world, and that you need to stand in that truth with people. So you expect the best of people, but you also don't back down. When something is wrong, it's wrong. And as an expeditionary leader, you have to stand in that place of truth, whether it's popular at the time or not. Mark Udall, who's a former U.S. Senator, was an executive director of Outward Bound. He talked about serving in Congress and having to make some really hard votes where he knew he actually might end up losing an election because of the choices he made, but he also knew this is what I needed to do for my own value system. So at the end of the day, he could sleep knowing that he was standing in his truth. And that's really the value system of an expeditionary leader, which is, not to be swayed by what may be going on around you or popular, but knowing you need to do the right thing. And that's the not yielding piece.
That's really powerful. And thank you for painting such a strong picture for us of what it means to serve, to strive, and not to yield. Marc, you mentioned quite a few times during this call so far about how the leader also must be a learner. Can you tell us a story about a time when you've witnessed the leader as a learner?
That's a great question. I can tell stories of the people I talk to probably easier than my own witnessing of things. I think they're very compelling. But one of the expeditionary leaders that I interviewed was someone that I knew from my field instructional days, and he's a dean of students at a private school in Boulder, Colorado, and he had a curveball thrown at him. He did a world studies program, very engaged and experiential, and he really was he was an expert in Mexico. He'd led a lot of trips to the Copper Canyon, and he knew the Mexican culture and the Tarahumara Indian culture really well. And that area became unsafe to lead trips to, and they had to change where they were going to take groups. And the group ended up selecting China as the area that they wanted to teach. So he was now responsible for teaching about history of China, and he had no experience with China. He knew nothing about China. So he had a 2-hour a day class that he was responsible for teaching, and he let the students develop the curriculum, and he guided them through how to design it in a way, and it ended up that they took a trip to San Francisco and Chinatown, and then his school ended up planning trips to China, and he ended up leading student groups to China to learn. And all of this came from the students' development, not him, because he didn't have a background in it. And it's so contrary to, I think, what we're taught, particularly in business, because in a business setting, you're supposed to be the expert in the front of the room. I lived that, Becky, for 7 years, because I was in the leadership team of an auto industry, but I'd never worked in the auto industry in my life. So I was now running a company with no experience at all. And what it led to was my trusting the team to develop the direction that we needed to go. My job was to bring out the best in them, not to give them the answer.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. And it kind of echoes something I saw in the chat earlier that seems useful to share. Craig said that he coached U.S. high school kids in an overseas cultural exchange as a basketball coach in Australia for a month. He was the coach, the trainer, and the adult, and had many other roles. And the kids grew exponentially, as did their leader. So anytime we get into those brand new situations, we're likely to learn so much.
Yeah.
So really quickly before we move on to the question that we had planned, William has a question here. He said that when he thinks of the expeditionary leadership, he thinks of Ernest Shackleton type of leadership, which seems to be the opposite of what we're actually talking about here. And so I'm wondering if you could reflect on this. He said, expeditionary leaders need to lead, guide, and make decisions and seek input from people, but ultimately the leader in that situation is forced to make calls at times. So, Marc, can you reflect on that as it relates to your experiences with Outward Bound?
I think that one of the things as an Outward Bound instructor, you have to learn and understand that differentiate. So you work a lot in the world of both natural and logical consequences when you're out there in the field. So you make a decision about whether or not it's okay for the safety of a group to give them that authority. So there are times, like when you're talking about the Shackleton expedition, there are times when a leader may have to assume that responsibility. And, to me, as an expeditionary leader, I'm making that decision all the time. Is this a safe environment for this group to make that decision or not? So if it's unsafe, whether it's physically or emotionally, then the leader actually has to take that lead on themselves. So certainly there are times when you don't hand that over. Like Outward Bound likes to use risk activities to teach people about themselves, but they're not actually dangerous. So doing a rock climbing event, for instance, at Outward Bound is one of the safest things that can happen because of all the built-in redundant safety systems that they use. Everything is double and triple backed up. So there's really, the worst thing that will happen to you is you might fall 6 inches and you might scrape and knuckles or bang your knee, but it's really pretty safe. But you wouldn't let someone climb that rock without those safety systems. And that in that instance, the risk is too great to allow it to happen. So you need to intervene as a leader. You don't let the group lead when you're in situations like that. And I think that I kind of created the expeditionary leadership language around the Outward Bound experience. So I think it's a little bit different than like a Shackleton expedition. I think the similarity is that you had a group that heads off into the unknown together, and they ended up in a pretty serious space where, again, you need maybe a more authoritarian leadership style in situations like that. And certainly I had times as an Outward Bound instructor where I had to take over the group, and usually it's because it's something that's unsafe. And sometimes it's emotionally unsafe. It's not just physical safe.
Well, it occurs to me, Marc, that anyone who thinks that they know what's ahead on their journey is dealing with an illusion. So in that sense, we each need to be expeditionary leaders because we're constantly going to a future that we don't know.
And that's our job as expeditionary leaders, is just to always be paying attention to the group and knowing when do I need to be engaged and when do I need to back off. In the beginning of a newly forming team, you should be very engaged as a leader and teaching and modeling the skills that you want. And then in the ideal of an expeditionary leader, in my definition of it, at the end of this time, the group shouldn't need you at all. You should be able to walk away, and they should be able to function completely autonomously. If you've done your job right, they don't need you.
That's super powerful. Well, given the fact that most of the people on the call haven't had this experience of expeditionary leadership, I'm wondering if we could talk about how we who maybe haven't had that experience could use the skills of expeditionary leadership in our day-to-day work.
Eduardo, you were looking like you wanted to say something. So I don't know if you want to tackle this or you wanted to wrap up something else before we tackle this.
Oh, you're muted, though. You'll have to unmute.
Sorry for that. I wanted to reinforce both your comments in saying that we tend to extrapolate the present, and we tend to think that the extrapolation of the present is the future, and that is our biggest mistake. There's not one future out there. There's alternative futures, and what we need to do is to understand what those probabilities are. If you are just extrapolating the present, you're probably trapped within 25% of the outcome, leaving 75% without thinking or without processing what could happen. And the probabilities is that the future will lie in the 75% as opposed to the 25%. And that is, what we were talking about. Expeditionary leaders have the scope of the 100%. We don't know the outcome, but we are prepared, and we know what the safety measures are of that cone of possibilities.
So
thank you.
Back to your question, Becky, I think that to apply the principles into a leadership model inside of an organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a community or a corporation. And I think it starts with a really strong self-inventory of who you are as a leader, understanding what you are and are not capable of doing, what you've learned yet, and what you have not yet learned yet, so that you operate principles of knowing and understanding. It's important that you have someone who can guide you. So whether that's a coach, a mentor, a boss, but the expeditionary leader model really works in tandem, so that leader needs to be growing and learning too. So I've worked with my own coach for 8 years, and she's my place to go, because in the work I was doing, no one else knew or understood the type of leadership that I was bringing to the company. So I needed someone else to help me with my own learning and development. It's really important that the leader not forget that they're on this growth path too. If they don't grow and learn, the organization is not going to grow and learn or expand either. When you're clear on that, I think the next is to lay out that if you look at a classic expedition, you make a course plan. Where are we going to go? Where are we intending to be in this expedition? So you set that intention, and then you have to actually really create a framework. And that, in the last company I was at, it was really, that became the cultural language of the company. So every new person that came in was given a blueprint of the type of company they were joining, so that you understand. It's easy for us to assume that we think what we believe is what everyone else believes, that our goal or our needs are the same goals or needs as other people. But the truth is, people are really complex, and we all have all kinds of agendas that we bring to any group we're in. And so without that charter, you tend to get people who, if I'm a type A personality, I'm going to dominate everything. And unless I know that that's not the norm and expectation and rule of the group, I'm just going to behave as I always am. So part of an expeditionary leadership responsibility is to lay that charter with the group about, here are our operating principles, here's our agreements, and you can actually do that with the team. It doesn't have to be your agenda, but you need to create that level of understanding. And that's the first basis of safety for people. When they understand these are the rules, this is how I can thrive within this group, now we can move forward. And then you start to stretch them into those challenges. So at Kohler companies, they give their people stretch projects all the time. Anyone who's under development is asked to take on something that's over their head, but they do it within the framework of that safety net. They have a champion inside the company whose job it is to talk with that person and debrief with them, help them learn through the adversity, and that person becomes a better leader after that 6-month or 12-month program. But without that stretch, Laura Kohler's talked about, so without that stretch, there's no way to grow and expand the company. They have to get people out of their comfort zones, and that's without that stretch out of the comfort zone, you won't get an expeditionary leader response. So at Croponi, where I worked, we did the same thing. We had 12-month-long strategic projects that we asked managers to take on, and a lot of them are way outside the scope of their normal jobs, but it was the opportunity for them to test out these new skills, whether it was communication skills, leading a group of people, problem solving, all of that within the context of the safety of a clear organization and somebody, a coach, a mentor, a partner to help guide them through the challenges.
And if I may add, everybody, as you said, learns. The executives, the leaders. In my case, if I can bring an example, I don't know if you remember, Marc, and I think you bring it up in your book when you speak about Delaney. As we were going through Academy of Agents of Change, we hit a point on module 5 where one of the agents of change has a strain on her kneecap, and she was a basketball player. And we had been through 4 modules together. This group had come together. It was a team already. And then Delaney could not go anymore. And she manages to recover, and she gets a permission to go from her doctor. But then the school decided that she was not going. And I lived through a period that was extreme, because Delaney wanted to come. The school said, no way, it's too risky. And we had to adapt and show the school that this was outward bound, that we would manage risk accordingly, and that we would set up everything such that she could complete the course. Because if you're part of outward bound, you don't leave anyone behind. As teamwork, Delaney was part of an ongoing outward bound course, even though it was a year course and it had different modules. We could not leave her behind. So the whole team adapted, the whole group. The school had to come and tell us what their requirements were, and we had to adapt. In the end, Delaney came. Delaney was approved to come, and she went on this outdoor activity, which, you know, at the beginning she wasn't prepared to do, but it was the whole team learning, the school, outward bound, the agents of change, adapting and learning.
And I would just add for people, Delaney Reynolds was the youngest person that is included in the book, and she had at age 16 she created a nonprofit called the Sink or Swim Project, and is now heavily involved in working with Miami-Dade County to help the county prepare for sea level rise. And she's harnessed young people all over the world to work on climate change issues together. And all of this came from the work that Eduardo was doing in her school through Expeditionary Leadership, but really a very inspirational young person who that lesson you talked about became a later lesson for her when she had other challenges she needed to push into. She used those lessons to keep pushing forward and launching her nonprofit.
But it was a lesson for the school, for myself, for the outward bound school that we were working with. Everybody was adapting at the same time. It was an incredible process.
Thanks for sharing that powerful story, Eduardo. So we have a few comments in the chat about this idea of emotional safety. And Mary said, thank you for speaking to it, that she's seen, wow, there's a lot of comments coming in. Sorry about that. My screen shifted. She said that she's seen situations where there's bullying and people feel unsafe. And so she thanked you for speaking to it. And then Serena mentioned, let me see if I can find that comment, that the terms emotional safety and psychologically safety are ones she's starting to hear more. And obviously in wilderness programs, creating psychologically safe environments is essential and an outcome of the program. But she's curious how you're seeing the concept of psychological safety manifesting in the workplace, because she believes that in workplaces, the concept is more nuanced and not necessarily essential. So Marc, can you speak to this a little bit? You know, what you see in organizations as it relates to a priority of creating psychological safety?
Well, I think it's critically important, and I think that if we look at the movement that's happening right now, the change that's happening in the world, and I don't know if people caught this or not, but in August there's a business roundtable that's made up of close to 200 of the leading CEOs in the United States, but they came out with a statement of purpose of a corporation, and they said for the first time that corporations need to stand for something more than just profit for their shareholders. And it's a seed change moment in our history, because corporations have had a really, I think, a bad rap, but a deservedly bad rap out there, because they focused more on maybe the negative side of greed and profit first and environmental damage, whatever that may be. But yet there are companies like where I worked that never operated that way. But the thing that I think is critically important is when you as a leader provide that safe space for people, when they know that they're welcome to bring themselves fully to the job. And this myth that you leave your personal life at home and you leave work at work, and it does not work that way. It's never worked that way. And I think that organizations are starting to understand that more so. But when you create that space, you know, at the company where I worked, people worked harder, not less hard, but it wasn't because they thought I, as their boss, was going to yell at them or catch them or punish them. It was because they knew they were respected. They knew that they could stretch them. They also knew when stuff happened. I mean, we shared a lot of painful things there too. I mean, we had families who lost children to the addiction crisis. We had people who lost children in childbirth. We had people who got cancer. One of our owners got cancer and passed away, but we didn't hide from that emotional stuff. It was part of the network of the company. And subsequently, I feel like when you do that, people want to be there. And ultimately, when people want to be there from a business standpoint, they work harder, they produce more. So I could show you lots of business cases that will show you that people, when they're committed to a cause and to an organization, when they share values, they work harder, which gives you a better business result. So this isn't like just the touchy-feely woo-woo stuff of feelings and things. This is real stuff that organizations are the network of our culture. We spend more time at work than we usually do at church, at home. And so when that's good, when we are allowed to be fully ourselves there and show up as fully ourselves, when that environment is created, those companies thrive. And they are statistically more profitable, and people don't leave. So turnover goes down. Things like healthcare costs, wellness, those costs are lower because these are people who are emotionally healthier. All business metrics are better when you create an emotionally and psychologically safe environment. So I think we're starting to change more to that. There's a better understanding of that than ever, but there's more work to do. And that's really why part of the reason I wanted to bring the Outward Bound lessons into the world, because I feel like this is it's a critical time in our world, and this is important. I think we can create healthy organizations and make them successful.
Eduardo, did you want to say something?
If I can reinforce that from a systems dynamics or from a systems thinking point of view, behavior is a function of structure, and structure, we tend to think structure is the physical structure around us, but that's not true. Structure is actually the interconnection in between those conversations that we have. So that is where we had it totally wrong. Structure is that emotional connection that organization has. So behavior is a function not of the environment, the physical environment, it's of that emotional environment. And that's where corporations have realized now that is where the benefit is. So to Marc's point, that's exactly what's happening. If you want to see a change in behavior by tackling structure from that angle of the emotional interconnection there is of the team, that is where the leverage point is.
Thank you.
This is the most critical skill, I think, of leaders, is really how to bring forward this emotional development within people. And it's again, hire an Outward Bound structure if you want a good leader, because they know how to do this.
Sure. So a couple of follow-up notes, because I'm seeing so many people talk about these topics, but I want to go back to Serena, who just added something brilliant. So she wondered if you could define what a psychologically safe environment in the workplace looks like, especially outlining the concept through many diverse perspectives, and also how leaders can create those safe spaces.
That's a whole giant topic in and of itself, but I'll take I'll give you my take on it, which is, again, it starts with a clearly articulated set of expectations. So where I was working, when someone was new, we went through an introduction to the culture training, and we first welcomed them to let them know they were joining a really special, unique place. It was really hard to get hired there. It took multiple rounds of conversation. We were really careful. We behavioral interviewed to find the right fit for our company. And then once people were in, we would start with a conversation of helping them understand that culture culture is not what I as a leader says it is. Culture is what people do day in and day out. Culture is how people interact when no one is looking. So it's each of our responsibilities to uphold the truth of what that environment may be, which means if someone is uncomfortable, it's any leader's responsibility to listen and to make room for dialogue. And if that happens early, those things don't fester and build up. But we can never neglect the fact that we had a new employee who had actually had some past experiences of being bullied in the workplace, and we were doing an event early on, and it was a little bit of requiring people to stand up in front of other people, and there was a lot of banter going on, and this new employee was really uncomfortable, and the thing stopped it immediately and had the conversation, because and if we hadn't, we would have shut down that person. But she needed to know that we respected her perspective, and subsequently she grew into someone who could relax and have more fun in the environment. But that first time it was uncomfortable because of her past experience. But the managers were great about recognizing that quickly and stopping. But this is the responsibility of the leadership, is to make sure that, one, you have clearly articulated principles, and two, that you don't ever let stuff slip out of that. It takes a lot of vigilance. Again, as a leader, it's that watching that you have to do. You have to be watching for teachable moments and teaching in those experiences. And if you're so focused on bottom line results that you miss that, you won't be able to accomplish this stuff. The results will happen. They happen as a byproduct, but we have to focus on the culture.
Sure. So I want to ask one final question. And for those of you who have more that you want to say on this conversation, Kelly did put in the chat a different Zoom link, which is more of a Zoom meeting where you can join us in a few minutes, and you can come on camera if you'd like, or unmute your microphone and talk directly to Marc. We're doing that kind of as an after party to this event to celebrate Marc's publication date for his book. And so we would invite you to come over to that virtual launch celebration. As soon as this webinar ends, we'll be hopping onto that meeting link, and we would invite you to join us. You can take a second and right-click on that link to save it so it's ready when we end this webinar. But I'm going to take this one final question from William, and he's curious, Marc, if you know of any companies that are seriously introducing this concept of psychological safety, and he's wondering what kind of businesses they are. Is it healthcare? Is it small businesses? Where have you seen this done well?
Wow. That's a great question. I would tell you I've done more on a research level than a personal experience level. But companies that I had some exposure to, that I saw taking care of their employees extremely well. One of them was Southwest Airlines, that had a chance to spend some time with their head of learning and development, and they do a similar onboarding, a cultural immersion introduction that focuses on care of the person. So that's one example I could tell you that I know of from getting a chance to be a fly on the wall a little bit. It's a great question. I mean, I think I'm struggling with an answer simply because I've spent most of my last 7.5 years working inside a company as a leader, and then interviewing people for the book. So I would tell you what I know of, from talking with Laura Kohler and the Kohler companies, and I think that that's part of how they operate. I'm going to put that down as a piece of homework, though, to go and do some more research.
Well, sure. And let's go for a moment soon, Kelly, to our slide. One of the things, if you're interested in learning more about Outward Bound, we would invite you to visit Outward Bound's website, outwardbound.org. Or if you want to hear more about the work that Marc is doing in his new business to help organizations create healthy culture and coach leaders, you can go to Marc's website at Marc M. Brown. So today is, though, the launch day for Outward Bound Lessons to Live a Life of Leadership. If you haven't already gotten a copy of this book, we would encourage you to go today to your favorite online retailer to get a copy, or at Barnes & Noble stores across the U.S. You'll be able to find the book in the next couple of weeks on their new release tables. So if you're able to see one in a store and send Marc a picture, I know he'd be happy to see it.
Great.
we are going to send a follow-up email that will include the recording today's event along with these various links, but Marc is willing to continue this conversation on a complimentary call. And so we would invite you to find out more about that, and we'll have those links in our follow-up email. So we're going to say goodbye for now, and we're going to see you over on that other link. Marc and Eduardo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. Yep.
Have a great day.
You too.